So I'm Sheana Davis. I am a friend of Kirk Mobert's and a chef by trade, and I love canning every season I can year round. I can sweet items, savory items, pickles, vegetables, tomato sauce, jams, you name it, I can it. Wild duck, wild boar. If I can can it, I will.
Let's flog your business. What's the name of your business?
The Epicurean Connection,
And what
located in Sonoma.
And what do you make?
I make fresh cheeses, and I have a catering company, so we cook all types of seasonal foods. So we're going to do a canning station. And we are starting out with sanitation is the beginning and very important part of canning. So for sanitation, I recommend having 3 to 4 stations, set up 3 to 4 pots. You have one for boiling water, and that you can dip all of your utensils in, including your spoons that you're cooking with, your ladles, your jar lifters, your largemouth funnels. And if you're not using bleach, you have fresh, clean towels. Clean just meaning washed and dried. And I do recommend white because you can tell that they're clean. And you just drop it in the boiling water and pull it out with your tongs, and you have a sanitized cloth. So I'm going to use my jar lifter opposite end, using the tongs. And I dip my towel in the boiling water. And that way I get it sanitized. So it's taking a fresh, clean towel that's been washed. And now I've dipped it in boiling water, so it's essentially sanitized.
Okay.
And then I'm going to take it over to my counter here, lay it out on the counter, and it is very hot, so I'm careful to open it. And we're going to use this to make sure that our counter is as clean as possible by washing it off with, first we rinsed it with soap and water, and now we're using a hot cloth for sanitation. Now we know it's sanitary, so we can lay our dishes on it. I take a second one. Take a second towel, because that one I'm just going to put in the laundry and reuse later. And you don't want to re-dip your dirty towels in your sanitation water, because remember, we're going to be dropping our jars and lids and utensils, so we don't double dip dirty utensils or cloths that we've done that much. So now I have a freshly dipped, so it's been washed in the washing machine, soap and water, dried, air dry or dryer. I prefer air dry, actually. I think it's cleaner. And over here, now I have this towel. I put it on the clean counter that's been sanitized, and I lay this towel out on the surface, and this is where I make sure I lay all of my utensils now, so that they stay clean. And then we'll open the jars, and when I open the jars, I make sure to keep all of my jars on this clean sanitary surface. So we have our 8 jars. Our 8 lids are in this nice sanitized container ready for us to pour hot water over them. So we're going to drop these jars into the boiling water. You want to be careful because oftentimes the bubbles will splash, so you're going to get splashing boiling water. So you want to cautiously place them with the mouth facing away from you so that when they do splash, they don't splash towards you with the hot water. This is where you want to make sure you're clear on which jars you've sanitized and which jars need to be sanitized. So I oftentimes find myself rearranging them so I have a different pattern when I'm working in a small space. So I take my jar lifter.
So a good work surface that's really easy to clean and keep clean is really important to this as well. And it should be really close by. Probably ideally behind you instead of 3 steps away, right?
Ideally next to each other or right behind you. But I like a long surface. I like a long, flat working surface. I'm going to take my very hot pot and pour hot water over my lids so that they're then now being sanitized. And that is because it's much easier to pull your lids out of a small jar than out of a large pot of boiling water. So you can use any container you want to sanitize them in, but you want to be able to submerge them entirely in boiling water. I like to set them up that's going to be the most functional for me, and I can work in any station. I can have 3 wide, but this is the station I have, probably 4 feet wide, so I try to make it as productive as possible. And I'm not opposed to rearranging it if you're left-handed, right-handed, because I'm left-handed, so you may come in and completely switch it around. So we have our jars in the sanitation, which is boiling water. We have our equipment, which has all been dipped in boiling water. So if I'm doing multiple batches of canning, I will oftentimes have a backup pot of boiling water just for dipping my utensils in versus the one that I put all my jars in.
Right, so you'll have 2 of them. One that you can dip
if I'm canning a large quantity, just so A, I always have a backup, I can keep pouring hot water into my pot to keep going. And 2, if one gets contaminated, which happens sometimes, You might drop sauce in it or something so you have a backup water so you can keep moving on. Because once you have everything sanitized and your sauce is boiling and you lose your boiling water and got to wait 20 minutes for it to boil, you lose your groove. So using my sanitized, ladle
dipper thingy, dipper thingamabob.
I have a measuring cup, and that helps you see how much you're putting into your jar. You want to fill it to about, well, actually, to the first line on the rim of the jar, whether it's wide mouth or narrow mouth. Fill to the bottom line. That's a universal line to fill your can to.
Cool.
And I do 8 jars at a time because that's how much each one of my pots hold is 8 jars for sanitation.
And 2 scoops is just about perfect for that jar.
1 scoops.
2 cups.
2 cups. And if you fill it too much, the jars will not seal, and in fact it'll start boiling tomato sauce over because we're simply putting boiling tomato sauce in boiling water and it'll just steam the lid off. And notice I'm stacking my materials. Nothing is touching the ground surface.
Right, yeah. Keeping your stuff all together.
Right.
And all up and in the working area and
in
not
my
out.
sanitary area. And even if you have to take a minute to realign so that you have all your jars, set up, it makes a huge difference on sanitation and also just productivity. If you get your routine, you just learn to work around your surface. Oftentimes people live in small apartments and they only have 4 feet, so they learn their system and they still create delicious gourmet meals and batches of canned goods. You might have a farm ranch that has, 16-foot counter and you have all the space, which actually can be sometimes more challenging because you get too spread out. And just for the record, for this recipe, for 8 jars, we purchased 12 pounds of tomatoes.
Okay.
And we cut off as minimal possible of the top of the tomato, chopped them up, pureed them in a food processor, but left them a little chunky. And we came up with 8 jars. So it's around 12 pounds of tomatoes per batch. And we added in parsley, basil, salt, and pepper. My theory is you can always add in olive oil, vinegar, garlic, anything else you want. This becomes a universal tomato sauce for you to use on any dish.
Oh, so you could just spruce that up any old way.
Yeah. But I find this is my basic base tomato sauce. So, empty. Notice my tools are left in there so they're clean. They're with the food that's been boiling and there's nothing's being laid on the surface. If you look at the surface, there's no
tools laying out.
No. I'm taking my 3rd new clean towel, dipping it in the boiling water, just part of it, not the whole towel, just enough to get the top section boiling. I squeeze out any extra water. I wipe the top surface of the jars, the top rim, and that is in case I dripped tomato sauce on it, which happens. And that way you also know for the last possible effort you're giving as much sanitation again as possible. I'm going to pour the boiling water off of these. So these have been sitting in boiling water for 10 minutes. They're completely ready to place on our jars. And I like to place them all on the jars right at once. One, they're really hot, so you can use tongs, but notice the way that I stacked them, the lids stay in. I can place them all right on the jars carefully, and then I can return and place them all, squeeze them on appropriately. So I take the lids and squeeze it on, but not as tight as you can. Squeeze it, and then once it resists, stop. And that is so if the jar lid needs to expand or contract, it has space to expand and contract as it's sealing from the steam. And I recycle rims when I'm canning, but I do not recycle lids for new canning products. I save those lids and use them for my pantry or storing food or gifting non-sealed items. But I do not reuse lids for recanning surfaces. And I know a lot of people that do, but I've just chosen not to. And I found multi-uses for them. I use them for, at home we store food in mason jars, and then we use the non-sanitary, the used lids for sealing our pantry items, flour, almonds, other jams that aren't sealed, and then you can buy them wholesale or even at your grocery store. They're not that expensive, but that way you have the ultimate sanitation for your preserves, which is what you want. So our water is about to boil for the first batch, and the water is just at the line of the strainer. I place my jars on the strainer that, remember, we placed upside down.
So Sheana, why do you turn it upside down instead of using the handles to pull it out? Nope.
I find it safer. I have found over time with chefs and home chefs that when they're lifting up the two handles between the steam and the heat on the handles, I've seen too many loads of fresh canned items fall on the floor and break, burned hands, or steam in the face. So I find pulling one jar out at a time using the jar lifter, and I feel I have more control. I lift one jar out at a time and carefully place it on the counter.
So you're only messing with one jar at a time. You'd rather not handle like a whole load of 8 with that.
I'm not comfortable handling 6 boiling hot glass jars that are on 2 handles that I don't trust to lift that weight out and not burn me, or if it starts to burn, I don't want to waste my load. So I tend to then get burnt hands.
Right.
And when you ask other chefs, they're the same way. Most of us do it one by one. Or you ask a lot of the, the farm ladies that have been canning for, 60 years, they do one at a time.
But they still keep making those things with handles.
And if you look at them, they're not that strong. It's a great pot, but the handles on them are not that strong.
Oh yeah, that's bogus.
So first thing I do is flip them upside down, and it fits perfect, and it doesn't rattle around, and I put my 8 jars right on top. I'm going to cover it, and we're going to boil for 50 minutes.
50 minutes.
Set our timer. So right now we're about 2/3 of the way through sealing our jars, and I just want to point out that you can see the steam is coming out. We have the flame on medium. It's boiling, it's steaming. We don't want to pull the lid off and remove the steam. It really stops the process. You want to refrain from peeking.
No peeking.
No peeking. So we have steamed our jars for 50 minutes. I'm going to turn off the flame, and when you're removing the lid, you want to make sure when you do open it, you open it away from yourself so that when the steam is released, it goes away from you, so it does not burn your wrist or steam your face. Right now, Kirk, you're hearing each one of the jars seal. They're all sealed. I can tap them. You hear that click?
Yep.
That's the jar sealing. So each one of them will make a little popping sound. And once it's made that sound, you know your can has actually sealed.
And that's the lid popping down, not popping
Correct.
up.
It's popping down. It sounds like it's popping up, but you want it to pop down and be indented slightly. All 8 of them are sealed, so I'm going to take them out one at a time and place them over here on my clean surface. And momentarily, then we'll wipe all of the jars off, and we'll tighten the lids so that then they will stay sealed for up to 1 year. We'll write the date on them. So you'll write date of production, and you'll write what you made. And it's best to do that each time as soon as you do your batch, because I have this theory, and this is from my own home. If you don't label them, by the time you've made 10 batches, you forget what the first one was. So by labeling each batch with the date, the product, so that way you know how long you should keep it. So we have our 8 jars with our flame turned off. If you're going to continue a second batch, keep it with the same concept. Keep your tools all clean and together. And this is what I would add in my second batch of jars. First I'd add a little bit more water. I'd add to my jars, bring it to a boil, and then time it for 50 minutes. So I feel all the jars, I poke at them to make sure they're indented, and you can see that indentation, Kirk. So they're all indented. I wipe off any moisture. I give them now that they've sealed, these lids will squeeze on tighter. We'll label them, date them, and place them in your pantry. And for your pantry, you want to make sure you keep them in the coolest place possible. Basement, closet, pantry. If you have a heat wave, you want to make sure your pantry doesn't get too warm. And keep them out of sunlight. And those will last you 1 year.